Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, my name is Kate Strickland. I'm the Senior Assistant Director of Application Review at the University of Colorado Boulder. I live in Boulder with my family, which includes a fifth grader and a freshman in high school.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Mark Stucker. I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good afternoon, friends. I have to start by giving a shout out to Sheridan. If you heard last week's podcast, I said that the ladies who led our case studies would love to meet you in person to answer more questions about file reading or other things about college admissions. And I said, if somebody steps forward from the Denver area and offers to host, it's game on. Well, I barely hit the airwaves when Sheridan reached out and volunteered. And so we're working on logistics, nailing down a date and time. But that is going to move forward. This will be 2026. And so we'll look forward to that. Now, like I said, these receptions, they can be in schools. They can be in community centers. Yeah, I've done them at Girl Scouts headquarters, homes, I've done them in like apartment conference areas. Also done them in hotel reception areas. There's a lot of flexibility. So Sheridan, thank you. Friends, on today's episode, you're going to hear a question from a listener from the West that Susan and Kate are going to answer. The question has to do with the listener's student is questioning her gender identity, has experienced some bullying, and is just wondering, is this something that they can write about, because the student really wants to write about this in the personal statement. So we explore that in our question from a listener. And then I was going to wait till episode 600, but I got the itch. That's right. I'm bringing back an admissions vernacular, big number, and a recommended resource. So you'll hear that next from me. I'm going to kind of go into more depth than I normally do when I used to do these. In the past, they were just like quick hit and move on, but I'm going to go into a little bit more depth today on those 3 sections. And then you'll hear the final part of the interview with Heath Einstein, Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU. Topic: what colleges look for when it comes to teacher recommendations, do's and don'ts, what they like and what they don't like. And this week, our final segment, we get into some real practical stuff. It's some of the most frequently asked questions I'm asked as a college coach about teacher recommendations. All right, let's transition to the question from a listener with Kate and Susan.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, we have a really important question, and I'm going to play the question. And I've got Kate and Susan back. Hi, Kate. Hi, Susan.
Hey, Mark.
And Kate, you can chime in with your thoughts, and then Susan, you can add to whatever you want to supplement to Kate's answer. So play the question and get your thoughts, Kate.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for your podcast. I am a mom in the Southwest, and I have kind of a sensitive question about my daughter's personal statement. I recently heard your podcast about how you definitely guide away from kids writing about an eating disorder. And similarly, I guess in some ways, my daughter has written a personal statement. She did that without my eyes on it until recently. And she is struggling with gender identity. And she writes about that, and she writes it beautifully, but I can't help but wonder if her grappling with identity and writing about some of the bullying that has gone on and how, basically she's just afraid of not living authentically, but she's still kind of figuring things out, right? She's a bit of a tomboy and is not really sure where that's going to lead her. So while I'm very supportive as a mom, trying to understand and support her in her journey of discovery, I can't help but wonder from like an admissions officer point of view, much like the eating disorder, if they might read something like that and consider it a bit of a risk or a liability to admit a student who is clearly struggling with such an important, life issue. So if you have any advice on that, obviously it's a little bit time sensitive because, they're all applying now, but I would love to hear an answer to that. Maybe this is a common topic, as it probably is, with this generation, but I'm just concerned that even though it's well written, it may not serve her very well or land very well, as you guys often say. So, from a concerned mom, love your podcast, would love some feedback on that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So back in 2023, the Supreme Court decision that struck down affirmative action in college admissions narrowed the ways in which identity-based information can be considered at a lot of institutions. And I imagine that many universities across the country are being especially careful neither to favor nor disfavor students who identify with a protected class status. So I would say if a student is choosing to write on a sensitive topic in hopes that the disclosure alone might give them an advantage during the file review process, I would say that, especially these days, that motivation might be misguided. That said, we really want students to write about aspects of their life that they feel are integral to an understanding of who they are and, the person that they are going to grow and contribute both on, your college campus or further on into adulthood. So I have a few questions. If a student is considering writing on a sensitive topic or a protected class identity topic, these are the questions that I would keep top of mind as the student is writing, editing, polishing. And if the answer is no to any of them, they might want to rethink the essay as it currently stands. And they sort of go in a logical flow. So always ask yourself as you're writing this kind of response, am I rooting my discussion of identity in my own individual, unique set of life experiences that I have actually had myself? If I am highlighting challenges or obstacles that I've faced as a result of this identity, am I demonstrating through specific examples new character traits that I've developed as a result of my past challenges? And if I am demonstrating new character traits as a result of my lived experience, and I'm carrying them forward with me in life, are those new character traits the kinds that colleges will see as beneficial to their student community? So sometimes you get an essay where a student has been through a really challenging time, and their conclusion is the world is a harsh place and people are not nice. So are you drawing conclusions from your past hardships that do you have a sense of disillusionment with the world? Do you mistrust people more often now? Have you narrowed your circle? Or do you instead, have you gained and are you taking with you maybe greater grit or tenacity or determination beyond what might be expected in people your age? Or have you developed a greater sense of compassion or empathy or open-mindedness as a result of your personal journey? The last thing I would say on this is also think about the message that you're sending to colleges based on even which type of essay you choose to answer with a response like this. So if you really want to tackle a topic and you decide to feature it in your Common App main essay, then you are signaling to schools that this is one of the key aspects of you that they have to understand, without which they wouldn't really understand you. But, if a student chooses a different topic for a main essay, but then they use the optional additional info section to write on this kind of topic, then maybe you're signaling that, yes, I really want you to understand what I was grappling with in high school or even earlier, but it doesn't necessarily define the last few years of my life. So I'm not advocating for either one or over the other, but I think applicants should be mindful of how information that they choose to share at different points in the application kind of presents to their reader. But I'm
I think
excited to
ultimately
hear
what
about
you're
it.
saying, and I know Susan's going to comment on this, like this should not be a taboo topic in of itself. It's more how it's done, how it's said, and what you say and what you bring, and what I learned about you through what you say. And I
Yeah.
know that was part of the question. Is this like some topic that should be avoided? But Susan, go ahead and say what you're going to say, and you can add to this.
Well, Kate, that was spectacular. The way you framed that, because I think that just so enormously helpful. Good essays in college applications, tell colleges kind of two things. One, do you have a good command of the mechanics of essay writing? Are you ready to do the writing work at the college the following year? And the second dimension is, what information are you adding to your application that will help us understand you holistically? If indeed it's a holistic application process, which, many are. So it's mechanics and it's narrative content that helps admissions readers understand you and your lived experience, and kind of speculate on the kind of person you're going to be on their campus. So I always say to kids, essays have to be, they have to be about identity and worldview, the inward look and the outward look. You can't just have one or the other of those. And essays have to have a past, a present, and a future. And if kids can start thinking about whatever it is they feel they want to add to their application, that's going to be representative of who they are. Most kids aren't thinking about along those lines when they write their essay, sadly. When my feeling is the essay should be the last thing the student does. They should understand all the other parts of the application first, and then the essay is the piece that kind of knits them together. Anyway, we've read, good and bad, and when an essay simply becomes a trauma dump, and I hate to use that term because I think that's mean-spirited, but that's the end of the continuum on essays about it can be mental health, it could be a physical condition, it can be a learning disability, it could be bullying, it could be family disasters. When in fact the university that I read for calls it a hit and run, meaning you get the story and then the student appears to completely run away from the story, meaning literally they hit you with it and then they run away. That raises a lot of concerns, because we're wondering what the message is there when the student does that. When something is written about, as you said, Kate, contextually in the student's life story and the narrative of their understanding of their self-image and the person that they are becoming and their understanding of the world around them, then it becomes it can be a very rich, complicated, enlightening part of an application. When a student has suffered in a profound way, writing often is one of the only things they can do. Hopefully kids have been in therapeutic relationships, and of course colleges, that's the first thing they look for, is the student, has the student been supported in understanding what happened to them, what they experienced, and the outcomes. Because kids who are open about having had professional help generally are building their toolkit for dealing with the long-term effects. It could be their own cancer journey. or a run-in with the legal system, or, you name it. It could be drug rehab. And, even back, when I was at Bates, and we're talking about, over 30 years ago, we wanted as many kids living in the dorms as possible who had been in rehab. It didn't matter what they were in rehab for, because the kids who were well along in their recovery journey were such amazing influences in their peer groups. I think kids who were at the very early stages of accessing help or not, self-assessment, understanding, were not necessarily well equipped to make the big step to independent living. But I tell you, kids, it almost became humorous in our office that this was just a value. It was something that even back then that the school had come to understand as bringing value to the campus community. So sometimes, when reading applications now, we look for, therapeutic language. Has the student been studying and learning about whatever it is they experienced? And is that becoming clearly a language of self-understanding and empowerment? You mentioned that, Kate. I think this mom, the critical statement she made in the recording of her question was the balance between the student's experience of being bullied, and the student's fear of not living authentically. And that was so profound to me.
Mm-hmm.
That was the essay right there. And this is a beautiful mother's response to what she saw her child going through. I was deeply affected by that. And for a student to write with that framework was, in my mind, very, very powerful. Now, mom's an adult, right? The student may not quite have that language yet, but there would be no risk in that narrative. In the hit and run type of portrayal of a trauma, yes, then colleges are left with so many questions that are not answered, and they have to judge for themselves.
Listen, I agree with you. The way the mom worded it was fantastic. It was deeply moving. And as an admission officer, you want to learn about forces that shaped you to be who you are.
Right.
And there was a lot in here about a major, forces that shaped you to be who you are. Now, when I read these kinds of essays from my students, the best ones are ones that the student doesn't stay completely stuck in the struggle. It's not just woe is me. Like if it's just bullying, and there's no lessons learned, or there's no optimism or something that made me stronger, kind of what you were talking about, Kate, the personal qualities. Those are the ones that don't leave with any, not that every single essay has to inspire, but I guess they don't land as well for me as a reader. It's when you're able to do some, deeper grappling with how you've grown from the experience. That's when they start to take on value in a way that
Right.
you can kind of connect the dots, because you are thinking about the student on your campus and how does this story that they shared impact who they're going to be on my campus. And so, I call it stuck in the struggle. Like when you're stuck in the struggle and you never, ever get out of that, if it's all the bullying was really bad, I came home, I'm depressed, now I don't know what to do. But if it just kind of ends that way, those are the ones to me that I don't feel comfortable with.
Right. That's the hit and run.
Yeah. So that's how you're defining hit and run. Yeah.
Right.
I call those the people stink essays. So
we need to bring back admissions vernacular. I stopped after we did about 250, and there's still like hundreds more.
it is my own term, TM. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, often I see this like when they're talking about a friend group struggle, and by the end they just realize like, and now I realized that people are just terrible. And like my rose-colored glasses about the
Yeah.
world are off. And you're like, oh, can we maybe take one more step towards optimism and hope? Because that's exactly what you both were saying. Like that's what you want to bring to your campus.
So we're all
Absolutely.
saying the same thing. Like in and of itself, this could be a fantastic topic. It's all about how it's executed.
Well, and the thesis of the essay is the student.
Sure.
It's not what happened, and that's true of anything, right? It's the all of the common app essay prompts are focused on some dimension of identity, self-awareness, and that's the point, because that's what doesn't come across elsewhere in the application. It's the student's only chance to speak to self, right? Again, it's the difference between a resume application, which is focused, basically on achievement and an accounting of one's life up to that moment, versus a complicated jigsaw puzzle of moving pieces that are irregularly shaped, and that, it's the job of a teenager.
Mhm.
If you look at, all the developmental psychology models out there, my favorite has always been Erik Erikson, psychosocial development. Right here, 15 to 17-year-olds, their job is identity. And girls are at the earlier part of that, which is not always a good thing. And guys are a little later. But anytime there's a big rock that is thrown into the river of identity development, the river has to flow in a slightly new direction. And that's why Erik Erikson says that every stage of growth is characterized by a crisis. And without the crisis, the growth isn't going to happen. And that's why kids who are overparented and, kind of bubble wrapped, they don't get to have those crises that actually move them in healthy ways from birth through adulthood, in developing the skills and the resilience. So, boy, there's a topic for another time. But as long as the thesis statement in the student's narrative is self and past, present, and future, as Kate said beautifully, then it's sound. I think, Mark, good taste does come into putting the pieces of an application together. And that's where it behooves kids to have other people read their essays, not a cast of thousands, and not to invite editing, but to invite reaction. And that could be a trusted friend, a trusted teacher. It might be a parent. Maybe it's not a parent, but it might be, depending on, the relationship. But for the student to share an essay and say, who's in this essay? Give me 5 adjectives that you learn about me in this essay. What's the takeaway? Now, granted, these are people who know you, right? Not who don't know you, like, admissions readers. But that can give the student incredibly valuable feedback to how the language they're using is coming across to a reader. And I think that's very valuable, especially with not just with touchy subjects, but with any subject.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say is, and I feel like I'm seeing more of this in the last few years, is kids are letting 6 to 8 people see it, and then they're contorting themselves into pretzels because they're getting all this conflicting advice. And it's amazing who they're going. Like they're going to all kinds of sources, including, a kid, and they know that's at the college that they're interested in, which, not saying in of itself it's bad, but I've just seen a lot of that and it's really causing confusion, and kids are writing sometimes good essays and they're starting all over again because they showed it to somebody and they didn't like so and so.
Well, and I think, Mark, that's why I say to kids, when you share your essay with someone to get feedback, ask them a very specific question. Don't just say, what do you think of this? Literally what I use is give me 5 adjectives you would use to describe me based on this essay. Because the point is how am I coming across? Right.
I say to every student when I review their essays all the time, first thing I say, what do you think you did well? Then I say, is there anything you maybe are not so sure of? And then I say, I have 2 questions. It might be 1, but maybe it's 2. I say, what do you want admission officers to learn from you? And what do you think they learned from you? And that's, sometimes I haven't even thought of that. And times when they haven't thought of that tends to be the times when there wasn't clear messaging because they hadn't really thought of it from that standpoint of,
right. That's great.
Of a clear message. So, well, let's wrap this up. But thank you so much, Mom from the Southwest. Really appreciate you sending this in. Thank you for your kind words about the podcast as well. Okay, friends, we're going to transition to admission vernacular. Now, this is actually one I've used before on the podcast, which I normally don't do without explaining it. So it has to do with the term tipped. When I say tipped, I'm not talking about a waitress. I'm not talking about an Uber driver. A lot of times you'll hear it used as in tipped in or tipped out. So what are we talking about? Well, let's say it's the typical college. And the typical college, I'm talking about, more selective schools, 70 to 80% of students make it through the academic review. The only number I've heard less than that, and I like to ask this question, is 65%. That's what UChicago told me. But every other time I ask, I hear 70, 75, 78, 80. I think there was one time I heard over 80, but basically it's in that 70 to 80 range for a selective school. But let's say the school's only admitting 30%. How are they getting from that 80 down to that 30? Well, certain things can tip you in or tip you out. It's not the same thing for everybody. In one case, maybe the extracurriculars were extraordinary. Maybe they tipped somebody in. Another case, it could be the recs, teacher rec, counselor rec, outside rec. Another case could be the personal statement, or it could be the custom prompts. In another case, it could be the institutional priorities. Let's say a school starting a brand new sports management major. That's a little tribute to Stephen Master if you've heard our Thursday episode. And a donor gives $10 million to start a new sports management program. Well, you better believe they want some sports management majors when the donor says, how's it going with that money I did? Are you enrolling any students? They don't want to say, next. So that's just an example of how a school can have an institutional priority. There could literally be hundreds of them. There's not hundreds for each school, but when you add up all the different ones throughout the country, there's going to be hundreds. Maybe it was an interview or a glimpse video. Maybe it's personal qualities. Maybe it's unique demographic background. Maybe it's demonstrated interest, or maybe you're aligned with the mission in a very unique way. All these things could tip you in or tip you out. And the truth is, usually it's multiple factors. And usually it's not one thing. There's usually overlap. And for example, let's just even take PQs, personal qualities. Well, you learn about personal qualities through recs, writing, activities, in the interview. So was it the interview, activities, writing the recs, or is it personal qualities? I'll give an example of how this works. So Will Torres is one of my favorite people. He used to be an admissions rep at Pomona when I was at KIP, and we've stayed in touch. I've actually been talking for the last 5 years about Will coming on the podcast every time we see each other at a conference. Anyway, that's not the point. But I remember Will was doing a presentation on the essay, for our students at KIP. And he said 80% of the time, in his opinion, the personal statement, and or the writing, the custom prompts, we're going to make the same decision if we had them or if we didn't have them. 80% of the time. But he said 20% of the time they're a game changer. And then he made the comment, 10% of the time they tip you out, and 10% of the time they tip you in. Now, what does that mean? It means you're already competitive, you were admissible, but so are a lot of other people. So this is just his opinion, but about 1 out of 10 times if somebody gets tipped in, it's because the writing was spectacular. And about 1 out of 10 times the writing knocks out somebody who is perfectly admissible, but we got to get down from our 80% to our 30 or our 20 or our 10 or our 5 or our 40 or whatever our admit rate is. So that's our admissions vernacular. tipped, and often used in terms of tipped in or tipped out. All right, the big number. Now, I might get so enthusiastic here that I might be jumping through your phone or however you're listening, because nothing inspires me more than philanthropy to education. And I've said this before, if there's one thing that I could see myself doing someday that I actually enjoy more than college admissions, yep, there is something, believe it or not, and it's philanthropy. But you have to have a lot of money to do it in a major way. So I do my best now, but someday I hope to be able to do it in a major way. And the big number comes from Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. I love that woman, and I've never met her. In fact, I was thinking the other day, if I was having kids right now and I had a daughter, I would literally try to convince Anitra to name her Mackenzie. That's literally how impressed I am and inspired by her. So why am I so inspired by Mackenzie? She gave $70 million in 2025 to United Negro College Fund. She gave $40 million to Morgan State in 2020, and then she gave another $63 million to Morgan State again this year. She gave $40 million to Howard in 2020, and then she gave $12 million to Howard in 2023, and then she just turned around and gave Howard $80 million 2 weeks ago. She gave Virginia State $30 million a few years ago, and then she gave Virginia State $50 million in 2025. She gave Alcorn State $25 million, and then came back again with $42 million more recently. She gave Alabama State $38 million. She gave Spelman $38 million. That was last week. And I haven't even listed all of her 2020 giving to Lincoln and Bowie and Norfolk State. I mean, altogether, she has given over $1 billion to 23 HBCUs from 2020 to 2025. And, you know, it's so funny because I was having a conversation with a very, very high-level person at KIPP this week. I continue to work and support KIPP. And we got to talking, and I was like, did you see what Mackenzie Scott did? He should just, announce the big Howard and Spelman gifts. And the person was like, shut up. What did she do now? So I told the person, about the gift. And the individual told me a story of how Mackenzie Scott gave $5 million to KIPP. And this is a high up person. So they were like, would you like to have a meeting? And Mackenzie Scott said, no, not necessary. I've done my homework on you. I've done my research. And then the person said, and the most incredible thing is all of her gifts are unrestricted. She's like, I've done my homework on you. You know what your needs are better than I know what they are. Here's the money. I have full confidence you'll put it to good use. As someone who did educational fundraising, I was director of annual giving for a year. You love all gifts, but you really, really love the unrestricted gifts. I remember one time when I was director of annual giving, I was talking to the director of major gifts, and this is literally 25 years ago. So this alumni from a long time ago, he gave he gave $100,000, which, now is whatever, maybe 300,000. I mean, it's a lot of money. But he gave it because he really liked these chimes that he was used to hearing when he was a student there. When he came back, he didn't hear the chimes anymore. Now, mind you, we like those chimes. I like them too. But internally, we were like, man, I'm so glad he's doing this. But boy, I sure can think of some places where we could give that $100K. So you absolutely love, love, love when you get unrestricted giving. I remember back in 2009, which is the year I moved from Westchester, Pennsylvania to Atlanta to take a position, director position at KIPP. And I used to be very involved in KIPP Philadelphia, which actually is really probably how I got the job I believe God is behind all my jobs, but from a human standpoint, because the executive director at KIPP Philly called the executive director at Atlanta, and this is how networking works, right? And then I was in. But I was talking to, his name's Mark Manella, I was talking to him in his office in Philly back in 2009, and I had just heard about the $4.6 million gift that KIPP had gotten for KIPP Philly. And I was so ecstatic. I was like, Mark, you guys got $4.6 million. Where did it come from? Well, it was 4 families. The Walton Family Foundation, they founded Walmart. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, founders of Microsoft. Eli and Edith Broad, they're the founder of what now is KB Homes. It was a different name back in 1955, but now it's KB Homes. And the Fisher Foundation, they're the founders of the Gap. So Don and Doris Fisher. So those 4 people gave $4.6 million. And I'm going on and on. This is incredible. And Mark is like, yeah, it is, but there's 55 conditions that we have to meet to get all that money. And some of those, he said, they're going to be almost impossible for us to meet. I'm just being totally honest with you. So anyway, I'm getting off track here, but I'm really into educational philanthropy. Mackenzie Scott has not only given $1.06 billion to 23 HBCUs since 2020, but she just gives it without any strings attached and says, go use the money. I've done my research on you. You're doing great work. I trust you. That's inspiring. And that's my big number, $1.06 billion in philanthropy to HBCUs and United Negro College Fund in the last 5 years. All right, admissions tip. So my admissions tip, there's a few things here. I like admitted student visit programs. Now, these admitted student programs are for your student when they get admitted to come and really immerse yourself into the school to figure out if it's where you want to come. So the tip is to several things. I really would like to see students go to several of those admitted student visit programs. Don't blow them off, because it's easy to say, well, I've already toured, I've done an info session. Why do I need to go back? They're different. Or I already know I'm going to the school. Why should I go back? I realize sometimes it's not going to be practical for either cost or time reasons. But there's several reasons why you want to go to these. And I remember when I was on the admissions side, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember my boss saying, admitted student visit days. Some people call them visit weekends because some of them are more than one day at some schools, but usually they're one day. I remember my boss saying, this is an all hands on deck event, meaning no vacation for anybody. Everybody has to be there. Why? Students are deciding, and you never know who they're going to want to talk to. So when you go to the admitted student visit, there's a lot of different things that they offer. Some places let you meet future classmates. Some of the students I've talked to who already knew they were going to their school, they're like, I'm so glad I went back because I got to meet, my future classmates. Some schools even break up into small activities. Some do mixers, some do different social things. And certainly you can kind of get introduced into different social platform networks where you can communicate. But you get to meet students who have been accepted like you, many of whom are committed to coming. You also get to meet current students. Some of them let you go attend a sample class. Some of them even put on like department fairs or club fairs. Some of them do housing tours, and sometimes you don't do a housing tour on the real tour. So it's the first time you're getting to see housing. Some have student panels and faculty panels. Financial aid officers are almost always available. If you've got a question about money, you can go by and talk to somebody about your situation in person. If you're struggling with a food allergy and you want to meet with someone to see if the dining team is able to accommodate your needs, you can do that. If you've got concerns about the career center and placement, these are all hands on deck events. Now, I'm not promising that every single person you ever could want to look up, some obscure person on the internet is always there, but this is a really good chance for you to pretty much meet almost anybody that you would need to meet to help make you the decision. A lot of times you'll get to meet the president and hear the president's vision, the dean of admissions, VP of enrollment. These people tend to be there. Now, so the first tip is make it a priority to go. But here's a second tip. Start doing the research now to find out what the dates are. And you want to continue to keep researching your colleges because nowadays students are applying to more and more schools. So let's say I have a student that applied to 11 schools. And let's say they got into 6. Well, chances are it's going to be very hard to go to 6 admitted student visit days. I think 5 is the most I've ever had anybody do. I mean, it's hard, especially if we're talking about airfare, hotel, rent-a-car, meals. I mean, it's a lot. So you want to keep researching because let's just say you're that student got into 6. Now you want to figure out, normally students are going to 2 or 3 of these. In some cases, it's just 1. Some they know they're going to the school, but they still just want to go, which I support. So you want to continue to do the research so that you can narrow it down to that 1, 2, 3 that you're going to go back to. And you want to have whatever your organizational system is so that you can see all the dates, because this one might overlap with this one, and then you got to figure out which one of them are you going to go to. Now, most schools do more than one. It's, there's no one size fits all out there. So start to compile those dates so you have a big master spreadsheet. Keep researching the schools and go there with intention. Go there knowing who you want to meet and who you want to talk to. I'm a big fan of admitted student visit programs and just wanted to give you a couple tips about how to maximize them. All right. Like I said earlier, friends, we've really been getting great feedback on this interview with Heath Einstein. And I'm not surprised because, to me, he's one of the ones in the Mount Rushmore of this college admission space as far as being a very good communicator. But also, we've never really done a deep dive on this topic in, 8.5 years. So, by the way, your feedback's very helpful to me. Lately I've been getting a lot of good feedback from the students on Thursday. And I'm already starting to identify some other students that I'm working with that have very interesting stories. And if you guys are more interested in seeing some more student interviews, then that's what we're going to give you. But let's transition and let's hear from Heath.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends, I hope you're enjoying this series I'm doing with Heath on teacher recommendations. We've reached the final segment, and Heath continues in this final segment by sharing things that you should not say in that teacher recommendation letter. And then what I do is I ask Heath just a bunch of the questions that my students are asking me all the time, just to get his wisdom on them. For example, can you ask a 9th grade teacher for a rec? Can you ask a 10th grade teacher for a rec? Can you ask a 12th grade teacher for a rec? Or do you have to ask an 11th grade teacher? What's the maximum number of letters of rec that you should submit? And even if a school says that you could turn in 4 or 2 or 3 additional, when should you do that? Or should you do it? These are the kind of things we talk about in this segment. We also talk about what should a student do if a teacher has committed to write a letter and they're just not doing it. You can go into your Common App and you see it hasn't been turned in. Like, what should the student do about that? And then we talk about whether it's appropriate or not for a student to send a thank you note or send a gift card to somebody after they write a recommendation. It's our final segment. Hope you enjoy. Heath Einstein at TCU. And shoot Heath an email if you've appreciated this interview. And friends, Heath's email is h.einstein@tcu.edu. And yes, Heath Einstein is related to the great Albert Einstein. Heath is related to the great Albert Einstein. That enough should warrant sending him a thank you. Another one of your don'ts is don't agree to write a letter for a student that you can't sort of enthusiastically support. Talk about this one.
Yeah. There was a time when colleges would get letters frequently that were kind of lukewarm. And it was about, hey, I know this student has potential that they haven't really lived up to, but it's okay because someday he'll make it there. I mean, that was like in the 1950s when they, and that was acceptable. And we understood that. Nowadays, it's sort of the expectation that students are going to have really good letters of recommendation. That doesn't mean that you can't talk about weaknesses that a student has overcome. So not everybody's, this isn't Lake Wobegon where everyone's above average. Like it's okay to not have everyone be an A+ student all the time. But what we don't want to have is a teacher who is in the process of writing for them actually harming the student and harming their chances of admission. And so if you are a teacher and you feel like, look, I like this person, but there's just nothing I can say here that's going to contribute to them seeing a positive outcome, then the teacher should politely decline and allow somebody else to write on behalf of the student. And that is difficult to do. And it is certainly difficult to hear. So if you're a student and someone says to you, I think it's in your best interest to get someone else to write for you, a painful lesson, but this is where you as an advisor can come in and say, you know what, it's better than getting a letter that's going to work against you in the admission process.
Yeah, and I used to get asked to write letters sometimes from some people that I'd be shocked they were asking me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really difficult to be in that position. I sort of pride myself on being a straight shooter and being direct, but you're looking at this really innocent kid. You don't want to devastate them. So what I used to say in those cases is I honestly think there's someone who knows you better than I do.
Yeah.
And it seemed to work better than, blasting them, which nobody wants to do.
No, nobody does.
I'm not saying, I just don't think I can say positive things. And most people won't do that. I think instead they'll just agree to write it a lot of times, and then it's mediocre and nobody's well served.
Right.
Yeah. So this next point on your don'ts, I love this, and I especially loved your PowerPoint. I don't know if we can capture the visual here without the PowerPoint, but you say don't talk about things that are already on the transcript. So on Heath's PowerPoint, I don't know if you have it up there, Heath, or not, but do you? Yeah, maybe you can walk it through, because I think it's so powerful the way you do it with the arrows pointing to things. So maybe walk us through the example you share in your PowerPoint here.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm pulling from real examples. Of course, I'm not putting the names of the students in here.
Sure.
These are real examples that we have. So I'm going to read a paragraph for you, and it's just a few sentences. It's like 4 sentences. So let's say it was you. Okay, so I'm going to use your name as if you're a student. But Mark's success expands far beyond the English classroom. He's a great student across the curriculum and has a strong 3.93 GPA. He has challenged himself with some very difficult courses, including several honors level classes and 5 different advanced placement classes. He has been on the school honor roll every semester of high school, and he has been a member of the National Honor Society for 3 years. So in those 4 sentences, I can cite 4 elements that were from the transcript and 2 that were on the resume. There's nothing in here that I didn't know about the student before I read that paragraph.
Point out what those things were, Heath.
So 3.93 GPA.
Yeah.
That's on the transcript. Very difficult courses.
Yeah.
On the transcript. Several honors level courses on the transcript. 5 advanced placement classes on the transcript. You were on the honor roll every semester of high school. You have that on your resume. You were a member of the National Honor Society for 3 years. That's on your resume.
Mm-hmm.
This paragraph is there's nothing wrong with it the way it's written, but it adds nothing to our understanding of who you are as a student.
No, well said. And how often would you see this?
More often than we would want. I mean, pretty frequently.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe not quite. I mean, that is an extreme example, but it's not far off.
Sure. Another point you bring up is don't harp on the negative. Any examples of this? Yeah.
So and we touched on this just a minute ago, and I think it's okay to say or to describe how a student has transformed over the course of the teacher's relationship with the student. That's a good thing. So if a student struggled initially to understand key concepts in physics, and who among us hasn't, that's okay to say and to talk about the resilience that it took to eventually get a strong grade in the class. But I mean, I've seen letters where it's so negative, you would think the student got a D or an F in the class, and they were an A or B student. The student was a quiet kid, didn't talk too much, occasionally would raise their hand. I mean, kind of like almost coded language for somebody who's not a good student. The term that I have come to not appreciate very much over the years is when a teacher describes a student as capable. That's like damn it with faint praise, right?
Sure.
And so when you see this over and over again, it just doesn't make the reader enthusiastic about the student. And now it's possible that a student is quiet, right? That I would consider myself to be somewhat of an introvert. And I'm not always the first person to talk. That's okay. but then talk about the positive attributes that, like, I can't imagine that there are that many students who don't have something that you could speak about with enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm. Let's combine two more that you talk about. Don't give me a handwritten letter, and don't go beyond one page. What do you want to say about those?
Yeah. The handwritten letter, we're a few decades beyond when that's necessary.
Sure.
And sometimes if you have beautiful penmanship, that's great, but it's still going to be harder to read that than it is to read something that's typed. And God forbid you don't have good penmanship and we can't understand what you're saying. That's not a good thing. So we don't see it too often anymore, especially since everything is submitted electronically. But occasionally we'll get letters that are handwritten and mailed in, and that's not adding too much. The one pager is something that I've come to believe it's not necessary to go beyond, because you're probably not going to be saying too much on page 2 that you haven't already alluded to on page 1.
Mm-hmm.
Most students who have letters of recommendation will have at least 2, one from a counselor, one from a teacher. In many cases, they'll have 2 teachers, and in some cases, they'll have a supplemental letter. So now we're talking about 4 letters of recommendation. If they're all 2 pages long, now that's 8 pages of recommendation that we're trying to get through, in addition to all of the other elements of the application. So most of the time, unless it's an extraordinary situation where you can't get it under a page, 1 page will typically do.
Now, one other one that I encountered I was on the admissions side, it really kind of would grind my gears, is the embellishment. And particularly was sensitive to it because in my territory, probably the place I got my most students from in the largest school group, I was getting this a lot. It was a counselor rec, but it's still the same concept, right? The most extraordinary student ever. The next one, the most extraordinary student ever. I'm sure that would be on your don't list. Do you see that a decent amount where it just can tell it's clear there's too much embellishment going on here? Because I've read your kind of what you said before. They forget we're reading in school groups, and now obviously it's not always the same teacher writing for every kid,
right?
But is that one that you see
from time to time? Yes. And it's hard because I just got through saying, well, don't write all of these like super negative things.
Sure.
Right? So now all of a sudden it seems like what I'm saying is everyone should be amazing. I think everyone can have some amazing part to themselves, but not everyone is, the captain of every team that they're on and the president of every club that they're in. And I mean, there is a difference. You've seen this over the years. There are students who are truly like the movers and shakers in their communities, and we need to uplift them in a way that enables the reader to see that they are a cut above some of the other students who may be wonderful in their own right and may very well contribute to our campus communities, but there are gradations here. So I do think that's rather important.
All right. I want to close by just asking you sort of some shorter, just general questions about recs.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the bullet points?
That's a new trend. I say new, it's probably, 10 or 15 years old now. I have no problem with that. I think a lot, especially like our younger admission officers, they like to read it in bullet points.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's the way that a counselor or a teacher wants to communicate information, I have no problem with that, especially because we're not judging the student on a teacher's ability to write.
Sure.
What we're trying to figure out is, can we glean any information? So however that is communicated to us is fine.
I think that's an interesting distinction that you notice the younger admission officers gravitate to that. That's interesting. And it makes sense. What are your thoughts about a student asking a 10th grade teacher for their academic rec letter as opposed to 11th?
My general rule of thumb is it should be from a teacher you've had within the last 2 years of high school. 10th grade is okay, especially if it's a 10th grade teacher who you then had again at a later point, 11th or 12th grade. If you're reaching back to 10th grade, the danger with that is we're seeing observations about you from the first half of your high school experience. And that is not who we're getting in college. Presumably, you have grown over the last couple of years, and we're trying to get a sense of what kind of student you're going to be like once you arrive on our campus. That's something that we can see from a more recent teacher. So we prefer not to see from a 10th grade, but if that is the person who's going to be the best writer for you, going to be your biggest champion, and someone you've maintained a relationship with since that time, I think that's okay.
Yeah, I've really moved to and accept that a lot more than I used to be. I used to really focus a lot on 11th, which I know is ideal. But then what happens is you get a lot of these scenarios where someone will say, like, pretty much all the things you said. Well, I'm going to have them again in 12th, or they're my advisor, or they're also whatever club they're in, their advisor to the club, and they kind of know them that way. And then it's clear that they're sort of the most enthusiastic about them, and you're weighing that, who's going to be your champion the most. Ninth to me is a hard no,
Oh, for sure.
Ninth is a hard no, and 11th is a strong preference.
Right.
But
the other one that sometimes we get is a student is asking a 12th grade teacher whom they haven't had before. And that's a little tricky because by the time that they're submitting that letter of recommendation, they've probably only had the student in class for like a month. And they don't have enough information to really write about the student in any sort of, with any sort of depth. So
that's usually a hard no for me for that reason. I'm like, either they don't know you well enough, or it's going to be too late. They're going to miss deadlines by the time they know you. And, I always say hard no, and I'm sure there could be one exception out there, but it's pretty hard for me to think of a time when that's going to make the most sense.
Yeah.
That scenario. What about the letter from the computer science teacher? Like some people say, I want math, English, science, social studies, foreign language. Those are the 5 core, economics, computer science. Fine if they fit all the other criteria and they know you well.
This is going to depend on the college.
Sure.
Because some colleges are quite explicit in what subject areas they want the teacher recommendation letter to come from. I think all else being equal, better to get it from a core subject area. But if one of those other areas, and I would probably categorize economics as like a,
social science.
So I think that would categorize there. But like computer science or like music, for example, and I'll use myself. I'm pretty sure I got my choir director from high school to write one of my letters of recommendation because he knew me better than anybody, and I had him for 4 years. So I think that's okay as a secondary letter, but I would still lean toward trying to get at least one letter of rec from a core academic subject.
Yeah. And what about when schools say, and you can see this in the Common App, they require 1, but they allow 3. Do you generally feel like one more max, and it needs to be adding something that you're not getting from anybody else? Would that be the reasoning there? Just because, like you said, this is just one piece of all the other things we have to do.
Yes. I can't imagine that a 3rd and 4th teacher will say things that the 1st and 2nd teacher didn't say. So 2 teacher recs max, 1 supplemental rec max. And we don't even, I would say on average, we don't see supplemental. So think about like coach, religious leader, family friend, whoever. Those typically aren't necessary. If there's something extraordinary that person can share that we can't see somewhere else, that's okay. But back to your question, 2 teacher letters max is sort of my rule of thumb.
You can probably help me with this. I've always wondered why schools allow for so many extra others, like the way it's worded, because especially in the Common App, if you go to the Common App rec section, it'll tell you there 0 others, 0, or required 1 teacher, 0 others, or 1 other. But some of them have like 3, but if you talk to them offline, they don't really want 3. I'm surprised they don't narrow that down. It helped me to understand what's going on there.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question, and I'm trying to. Now that you're mentioning it, I don't know what we say on our. I have to go in and look.
That's funny.
I'll ask our dean of admission about that. I suspect it's to allow for those extraordinary circumstances and not limiting students who do have something that they feel they need to share. But in so doing, I think potentially you are signaling inadvertently to students that they should be doing more than they actually need to be doing.
Yeah, I can think of one person. I won't mention them, but I probably could because they've said this publicly. Well, I'll mention the school. It's Emory. And they've said, if you send me in X number, I'm reading one, you know? And so you're better off sending me your best one, you know? Because I'm telling you right now, I'm going to read one, you know? Like one other. Like, I'm not going beyond one other. So you're better off picking the one you want me to read.
That's
And
interesting.
I'm comfortable saying that because that's been said in a public forum before. So
Yeah. I mean, I would say similarly, not that we wouldn't hold that stance publicly, and we'll read what you send, but also we're human beings, and you just run the risk of some human being not paying close enough attention when they're on rec letter number 8.
Mm-hmm. Any advice, Heath, for a student who's asked a teacher well in advance, they've agreed, everything looks copacetic, hunky-dory, and then now they're staring at it and it's not getting turned in when it comes to reminders? Any what did you tell when you were on the college counseling side and your students came to you and said, I've asked this teacher, they're not doing it, and I'm getting nervous?
Yeah. Well, at our school, we would intervene on behalf of the student, but I also fully recognize that most students don't have a resource like that. I think it would be a good idea to think of this as like a project and having some sort of project management system, right? Like you know how with if you ever send out an invitation through Evite or a similar
Mm-hmm.
system, they'll shoot out reminders periodically, like 1 day out, 3 days out, 10 days out, kind of a thing. And I think it's okay for a student who has asked a teacher in May that has a recommendation deadline in November to, at the beginning of senior year, to say to the teacher, thanks again for agreeing to do this. Just as a reminder, here are the schools I'm applying to. This is the deadline. So great. I really appreciate you. And then at the beginning of October, hey, here's another reminder for, as opposed to you've asked in May and now it's October 31st and it's due the next day and they still haven't turned it in. So I think with the periodic reminders, they're more likely to be met with success. I mean, how many times have you been the recipient of a third and fourth email and it's like, oh yeah, I do have to pay my bill this month?
Sure. Well said. And I'm sure send a thank you letter. Send, that's important. They put the work in. What are your thoughts on the ethics of get them a gift card if you're comfortable doing that? Perfectly fine, or don't need to do that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think it's necessary. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to do it, it would be something small. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of employers won't allow teachers to take gifts. It could be perceived as a conflict of interest. If you're going to do something like that, and write a thank you letter, which I think a student should definitely write a thank you letter. The only piece of advice I would give is to do it before you get your admission decisions, because you're not thanking the teacher for getting you into college. You're thanking them for putting forth the effort in the application process. So if you have a November 1st deadline, you're not going to hear back from the college until December at the earliest if you're applying ED,
Mm-hmm.
and very likely not till the spring semester. Go ahead and send a thank you note on November 10th or 15th, just to say, hey, I see what you've done. I appreciate it. No matter how this turns out, I couldn't be more pleased with having you as my teacher and for supporting me.
Awesome. Anything we haven't said about Rex that you wanna share in closing, Heath?
Despite spending an hour talking about this, and while they are important, I think for the most part, if you were to ask college admission folks where letters of recommendation rank, they are going to be behind the transcript. They're going to be behind, and that includes grades and curriculum. They're going to be behind the activities that a student chooses to do and the way they spend their time. So, and my purpose in saying that is the students may very well spend a lot of time thinking about this and stressing about it, and it will add texture to the college's understanding of the student. But it's not very often that a recommendation letter by itself is going to be the reason a student gets in or doesn't get into college. So I just want to say, take it all in stride, and relax about the whole thing.
Do you think it's fair to say the more you go up the selectivity meter, the more they can come into play?
Yes, I do think that that's fair.
Yeah, because I find that the most selective schools are some of the ones that talk about how they find them to be really valuable, when most kids are 1550 above in their testing with, mostly 5s and occasional 4s on APs, and I've got the great grades, and the, personal qualities and impact can really sometimes come through there, and they can play a role.
Yes.
So that's just wondered if you agree with that.
I do
Heath,
agree with that.
This is awesome. Appreciate you as always. We'll hit you up in 6 months and have you back. You and I will figure out what makes the most sense, and good luck at TCU managing this big expansion plan. I saw construction everywhere when I was there.
Yeah, I couldn't find a place to park this morning, but other than that, everything's great. Thanks,
By the way,
I appreciate it.
By the way, I can't remember the name of it, but I had the best boba tea I've ever had. Wow. It's like walking distance. It's not that far from your bookstore. And it was incredible. In fact, there's a TCU student in there, so we had a good 15, 20-minute conversation with her. But I'll have to go look at my credit card bill. And if you haven't hit it up, you got to hit this boba tea place up over there.
Okay, yeah, please do that and let me know. I'm not a boba tea fan generally, but given your recommendation, I'll have to go there.
Yeah, I'll even tell you what to get.
All right, Mark, take it easy.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right, take care, my friend. On Thursday's episode, co-host Andy Strickler is back, and we continue to talk about test scores. But then we just hit the mic and we do what a lot of you have said that you like. We just bounce around and we just chat. We had a few other topics. Next, we'll have the final part of my interview with Stephen Master, adjunct professor of sports business at NYU Stern. But more than that, a national leader in sports management in this space for a quarter of a century. And we'll be talking about careers in sports business, sports marketing, how do you break in, what players are looking for, all of that. And it's the final part. And then we'll have the final segment of my interview with Carmen Chavez, one of my former students, reflecting back on her experience at Duke. What did Duke do really well? What does she wish Duke did different? We'll do a deep dive on Duke from the perspective of an alumni who just graduated a year ago. And friends, I close out with a quote, and it's from Jesse Owens. And I've never really talked that much about this, but I was hardcore into track and field. I mean, 15, 16, 17, 18, it really was consuming for me. And I did it in college as well, when I first got there. Well, Jesse Owens is a 4-time gold winner in the Olympics. And this was really breaking the color barrier, at a time when Hitler was sort of preaching his superiority of the white race. And he said nobody would ever be able to beat his Germans in any event. And so right in front of Hitler, Jesse Owens wins the 100 and the 200 and the 4x1 and the long jump. So it's still considered one of the most heralded sporting events, and it's coming up for its 90th anniversary. This is 1936 in Berlin, in Germany, at the Olympics. And here's what Jesse Owens said afterward. There was a lot of ballyhoo about all of his accomplishments, and this is what he said. The battles that count aren't the ones for gold medals. The struggles within yourself, the invisible battles inside all of us, that's where it's at. Did you catch that? The battles that count aren't the ones for gold medals. The struggles within yourself, the individual battles inside all of us, that's where it's at. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.